a little more practice, right? We got to this one yesterday. An increase in the price of burritos will cause an increase in consumer demand.
Yeah.
Right? And what did we say?
We said it's positive.
How do we know it's positive?
You can test it.
We can test it. All we have to do is increase burritos and monitor the number of music downloads. Okay. iPad abuse, Kyle. iPad abuse. I did take attendance. Thank you.
Take it first hour.
No. Thank you. Already got my naughty email.
Get fired.
Okay. Economists, despite the fact that they can look at the same data, don't always reach the same conclusions. And so they will say different things about what should be done. They'll issue us different normative statements, despite the fact that their positive statements may be in agreement. Silly economists. Okay. Sometimes, although they have a positive statement, the positive statement has not been affirmed or refuted. And so they don't know whether the data that they're acting on or the assumption that they're acting on is actually accurate. And so they argue about that. And then they argue about what should be done about what they're not sure about. So the thing where the government should print more money, that is definitely something an economist might say. The government should revise its tax policy, or the government should print more money, or the government should print less money. Those are economist kind of ideas. And how do you know if they're right or wrong? You don't, because they're normative. But you can take action on normative statements and see how it turns out. The problem is the data always lags behind the action. And some actions that we take economically take a long time to actually impact our economy. And so it's very difficult to know who was right when. And unlike in an actual science experiment where you would change one thing at a time and everything else would be closely controlled, in an economy, you can't do that. So I increase the money supply and simultaneously the country goes to war. Well, gee whiz, I guess we can't really measure the impact of increasing the money supply because the country going to war has all of its own impacts as well. Okay? There are some things that economists agree about, period. Okay? Putting a price ceiling on rent reduces the quality and quantity of housing available. If we say the maximum you can charge per square foot is, there's going to be fewer open housing units available, and the ones that are controlled are going to be poor quality. Think about that for a second. Does that make sense? What?
A little bit.
If I'm living somewhere where the rent can't go up, am I ever gonna move?
Perhaps.
Possibly, if my income increased. But who tends to live in rent-controlled housing? People on fixed incomes or low incomes or very limited incomes who are unlikely to see an increase in that income. If I am the landlord of some of those properties, what incentive do I have to invest money in that property? You don't. There's no reason to spruce it up so you can get a new tenant. There's no reason to spruce it up so you can charge a higher rent. And so it just sits and decays. Okay? They agree that tariffs, which is a tax on imports, and import quotas where we actually limit the quantity of stuff that can come in, reduces general economic welfare. You guys understand something about economics already that tells you this is accurate. What about economics do you know that makes this accurate? Trade. Trade makes everyone better off. So if we do things that limit trade, we are limiting the opportunity to make everyone better off. Economists agree that outsourcing work is okay for the economy and, in fact, beneficial. Economists agree. Who doesn't agree?
Workers. Our workers.
Politicians and workers. The workers whose jobs have been outsourced and the politicians who are trying to get jobs or trying to get elected by the people whose jobs have been outsourced. Economically, why shouldn't the U.S. restrict that?
Because it forces us over time to be like smarter, and our jobs turn more to like computer engineers and that stuff.
Yeah, over time, the economy has to change and adapt. And if we legislate stagnation, which is what we're doing if we pass laws saying you can't outsource, then we are forcing stagnation in our economy. The other thing is, what's the difference between shipping a good or shipping a job overseas? Trade makes everyone better off. If that job goes overseas, someone in a foreign country is earning money, and probably more money than they'd been earning before, and what are they going to potentially do with that money? Buy our exports, which then brings money back into our economy and sustains jobs here, etc. The U.S. should eliminate agricultural subsidies. What is a subsidy?
Government funds.
It's government money that's given to support something. We've already talked about subsidies in here when we talked about your school lunches and what they would actually cost. The government subsidizes those. They give money to help support the low price of those. So an agricultural subsidy would be, corn prices were really low last year because we had overproduction of corn. It looks like it's going to be a great growing year. So Farmer Dylan, we're going to actually pay you to not plant 80 acres of corn. How does Farmer Dylan feel about that? Sweet, I get paid to not work hard in that particular set of fields. Okay. Because we've had a shortage of pork the past couple of years, pork farmers, we're going to pay you additional money to increase your pork productions. We're going to subsidize the pharmaceuticals that it takes, or we're going to help you buy more piglets. Anything along those lines. Pork farmers, how do you like that? Great. Yeah, more money in my pocket. 2 years from now, pork farmers, when the impact of that subsidy and all of those baby piglets have grown up and are going to market, pork farmers, how do you like that subsidy? You don't, because what happens to the price of pork 2 years from now? It goes down because there's a lot of pork on the market. Okay, the gap between Social Security funds and expenditures will become unsustainably large within the next 50 years if current policies remain unchanged. 85% of economists agree on this. Okay, guys, economists don't agree on a whole lot. So numbers this high on things they agree on, chances are they might be right. Though, is it entirely possible for a bunch of people to agree about something and be wrong? Absolutely. The question is, let's just say maybe they're right. Why aren't we doing something?
What is
Expenditures, money going out. Kyle?
Because that means like price cuts that some people wouldn't like right now, like stop spending money on education and stuff like that.
To put more money into the Social Security fund, we have to stop spending money elsewhere. So let's cut defense. Oh wait, everywhere where there is a military base or an arms manufacturer's plant is not going to like that, right? So that bill's not getting through Congress. Well, let's just cut benefits then. Who doesn't like that? Everybody currently receiving benefits or about to receive benefits. Have any of you ever heard of AARP? ARP? Yeah, if you've ever watched any television, you've seen one of their commercials. Probably, if you were to ask your grandparents, most of them have some affiliation with AARP. They are one of the largest lobbying blocks that that lobbies Congress, is the oldsters. So are we about to cut Social Security benefits? Probably not. But we could increase the Social Security contributions. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. Because you know who doesn't really vote much? You guys in 2 years. And we could cut your future benefits because you know who doesn't really vote much? You guys in 2 years and for the next 20 after. Don't be stupid. Don't be lazy people in a democracy. Stay informed. On the other hand, go ahead, don't vote because I'd like to still be able to get Social Security. So, okay. Large federal budget deficit has an adverse effect on the economy. What's a deficit? Debt, where you spend more than you bring in. Okay. Our government very frequently spends more money than it collects, which builds our debt. And debt requires interest payments, which become something else the government has to spend money on. So if 83% of economists agree that a massive budget deficit doesn't do well for the economy, why don't we fix it? Because again, to fix it means that you have to either cut spending or increase income. Nobody wants to spend more money or give more money to the government, and yet nobody wants what they get from the government to be cut. Minimum wage going up makes for more unemployment amongst unskilled workers and the young. 79% of economists agree on this. And yet, what's going on nationwide?
Talking about raising minimum wage.
In some places to how much? $15.
What? I want to work there.
Seattle Airport, SeaTac.
Doesn't that like make inflation too?
It eventually does have the effect that it drives prices up and thus ultimately eventually negates any increase in wages which you benefited from. My question on this one is, what's up with the other 21% of economists? I can't find anywhere anyone has written about how economically a minimum wage increase decreases unemployment amongst the unskilled and young workers. I don't. It's like the 4 out of 5 dentists recommending sugarless gum. What's the 5th guy doing?
Recommending.
Generally, in his case, he's recommending no gum at all, but I don't. Here, have a lollipop. Effluent taxes and marketable pollution permits represent a better approach to pollution control than imposition of pollution ceilings. Okay, an effluent tax is a tax on the gook that your factory discharges or the pollution that it lets out into the air. Okay, effluent is the stuff that goes out. Okay, so if we tax how much you're polluting, then that, according to economists, is going to do better, to control pollution than just saying you can only pollute X amount. If we say you can't pollute at all, and if you do, here you're going to be taxed. Why is that more effective?
Because like a lot of the companies would just pretty much go up to that ceiling with pollution ceiling, and with taxes they wouldn't really want to go up that far.
Right. If you have the pollution ceiling,
That's free pollution.
Until you-
Whereas if we tax every little bit of pollution you release into the environment, that's costing you money. No, you don't swear in this household. Don't do it. And so what happens? You swear. Swear jar. You don't swear. Why? Because it's hitting your pocket. And all of a sudden, that F-bomb isn't quite so appealing if it's going to cost you 50 cents. Michael? Question?
No,
I'm just stretching. Okay. All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Ronald Reagan studied econ when he was in college. Senator from California, the senior senator from California, Barbara Boxer, studied econ. Sandra Day O'Connor has a degree in economics.
Well, we didn't know these names.
No.
Okay.
Isn't that an ideal degree for somebody who's the Secretary General of the UN to have? Econ? I mean, you kind of have to be a generalist to be an economist. You have to understand a little bit about everything. Former, now,
Yes.
CEO of Microsoft, right? Who's surprised that Arnold Schwarzenegger studied anything at all and that it was the incredibly complex science of econ, right? Anybody ever come across Ben Stein other than being the teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Bueller. There's a stunner. Uh-huh. No wonder he can't get no satisfaction. An economist would never be satisfied.
What?
Didn't you go to Stanford?
He did go to Stanford,
That makes sense.
and now he's a very wealthy man, not just from his NFL earnings, but he owns a chain of car dealerships. Because they've always said there's two certain things, death and taxes, right? So become an accountant or a mortician, and you'll always have a job. People need transportation, so selling cars is pretty sure deal too.
You also went to Stanford.
Tiger did also go to Stanford. Diane von Furstenberg, high-end clothing, like high-end clothing.
Yeah.
Ladies' dresses, mostly ladies' clothes. She doesn't cross the gender line. All right, so we're going to skip the summary section and move on.
Pause it.
Okay. You are not economically alone in this world. Your cell phone, I can almost guarantee, was not made in the United States. The coffee you drink was not made in the United States. It might be from Kenya, it might be from Colombia, it could be from Mexico. It wasn't grown here. Find a friend. Where's your shirt from? Since most of you can't read the back of your neck.
Oh, she meant like
Oh,
country.
Yeah.
She goes.
No, I can't.
She says Latin.
Ooh.
Where you got?
You got India, I got Guatemala.
India, Guatemala,
Vietnam.
Vietnam,
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua.
US.
Woo! Made in the USA. Anybody else? Bangladesh is usually a popular one. I would speculate that many of your shoes are Chinese. Please don't investigate that. We've got enough stink in this room. Okay? Your hair products might be made in the United States. Some of them might be made in Europe as well.
China.
You have Chinese hair gel?
No, I have my
Your shoes was made in China? Okay. All right. Trade can make everybody better off. Well, the fact that trade has made you better off is why you're wearing what you're wearing. If all of your clothes were made in the United States, you would not be getting a $10 t-shirt from Old Navy. No way it would cost $10 in the United States. Okay? So here we're going to learn why trade makes everyone better off. Okay. So we've got the U.S. and Japan. One country makes computers, the other one makes weed. I'll leave it to you to figure out. Okay. So we look at it two different ways. Each country is going to choose to be self-sufficient. We're not trading. Or then we're going to allow trade, and they're going to trade with each other. Okay. All right, the U.S. has 50,000 hours of labor available for production each month. One computer means 100 hours of labor. So how many computers can we produce? 500. 1 ton of wheat takes 10 hours of labor. So how much wheat can we make? 5,000 tons. So we graph it out. Follow? This is just review, right? Let's say we go halvesies. We end up with 2,500 tons of wheat and 250 computers. More than enough to sustain our economy. Okay. So now, you play the home game. Quick, scratch paper time. Graph it. This isn't fair. I can't do this in my head.
I can't. It's on my calculator.
Okay, 4 computers is 500 hours. 4 tons of wheat is 100 hours. If it's too hard to divide by a number that ends in 5, make it end in 0.
Or it's on my calculator.
You're not going to be able to use a calculator on the exam.
See, if that's on a calculator, I'll just not use a calculator. Yeah.
Kershell, you look stunned. Are you devastated by the magnitude of the math?
No, just.
Then we're gonna have to make one of these tomorrow. Wow, I've been in your class way too long.
What, that I actually prepare you for the
Yeah.
assessments you take?
Yeah.
All right. How many computers can Japan produce?
140.
That is correct. How many tons of wheat?
1,200, 1,200.
Okay. So this is Japan without trade. They're going to be either very well electronified or fairly well fed, but probably still a little hungry. See, because what do we know about Japan's geography?
Can't grow wheat.
It's a volcanic island. They're not growing a whole lot of wheat. Okay. So Japan's going to use half of its labor to produce each good, so they're going to end up in the middle. 120 computers, 600 tons of wheat. You're going to have a lot of hungry people who have blazing fast internet. Okay. So without trade, the U.S. consumers are going to get 250 computers, 2,500 tons of wheat. The Japanese are going to get 120 computers, 600 tons of wheat. Okay. Is anybody going to be particularly happy? The few people who manage to get their hands on both a computer and some wheat, probably. Okay. All right. So now we have to figure out at what point economically should the countries trade. We can probably agree that they should trade based on the numbers we've seen, right? So you've got your US PPF. Draw this on there.
I don't remember the USPS.
That's because you didn't print out the notes.
I know. Thank you.
There's your US PPF. Now we're going to go, what did it say, 3,400 tons a week?
Yeah.
Okay. Got your US PPF?
Yep.
It's just going to take me a while to get back where we were. Second component, Japan's going to make 240 computers. So how much wheat can they make with their leftover labor?
0.
So applying it to the actual graph. Okay, is that what you came up with on yours? Somewhere thereabouts. Now in Japan, it's computers and computers only, no leftover labor. Exports are produced domestically and sold overseas. You make it here at home, you sell it out of town. The verb version of that is to sell domestically produced goods overseas. The opposite of X is in or M. And so imports is the opposite. It's made overseas and sold here domestically. Do I totally have to give you time to write this down? Okay, good. All right. So back to the US and Japan now. Tristan, what you got on your phone?
Just the notes.
Show me.
Okay.
Yeah. There.
I know. Don't do that to me. Okay. You guys aren't scribbling furiously. Is this too easy? Can we just jet through it? Okay. What's this going to look like when I let that dot show up here? What we imported and exported. It's going to be what? It's going to be outside the curve, but we can't produce outside the curve.
Well, with trade, we trade.
Because we're not producing, we're just having. Oh. So, you can't on your own produce outside the PPF unless you increase inputs or increase technology. But through trade, you can reach outside your PPF. This is huge. This is huge. It is proof that trade makes everyone better off. Now, can you, if you are stupid, arrange a trade that makes you worse off?
Yeah.
How many of you were little, fell for the, I'll give you 2 quarters for $1 because 2 is more than 1.
Yeah, forward.
There would be a trade that managed to make you worse off. Okay, you can if you are not considering all of the factors at play. So for Japan, remember they're clear down here at the bottom on the x-axis. They are starving, but by golly, they can play Mario Kart. And now they can play Mario Kart and eat.
Welcome to Japan.
I think Japan thinks we're welcome. Because in this room, who has never played Mario Kart? Uh-huh. So what do you say, Aaron?
Thanks, Japan.
All right. So we gain 200 computers and, or I'm sorry, 20 computers, 200 tons of wheat from trade. Pretty cool, huh? With trade, we actually end up consuming more wheat. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? Except we can do that because we don't have to allocate the labor that would have made computers to that, and we can put the labor to making what we make best. All right. And that is the concept of absolute advantage. You can make it with fewer inputs than someone else. That means you have an absolute advantage. Who was our person who was bad at math? Chuck, was it you who was bad at calculus? Or you were good at calculus? In the example I made up a couple of days ago.
I think it was
Oh.
that was bad at calculus.
Okay, it was who?
I think it was
me. I was
Matthias.
bad.
Yeah.
Okay, Matthias was bad at calculus, and who was good at it? Maddie. Okay. All right. So Maddie has an absolute advantage in calculus homework. It takes her fewer hours than anybody else to get that homework done and done right. Okay. So in our example here, the U.S. has an absolute advantage in wheat. Less inputs, less hours of labor to make a ton of wheat than our trade counterpart. Okay? If each country has an absolute advantage in that good, and they specialize in it and then trade, they are definitely both better off. So in our example, Matthias can write a 3-page essay in less time than Maddie can. So they both specialize. Maddie does 2 sets of calc homework, Matthias writes 2 essays, and they trade. And they are both better off. I am in no way advocating this actual academic behavior on your parts. I am simply trying to provide you with an example that is somewhat relevant to your lives. Don't cheat. All right. I can just see this video being used as testimony for why I cheated on my calculus homework. No.
It's not cheating if you don't die.
Oh, no, it's still cheating. But Mrs. Hoke said I should utilize what I have an absolute advantage in and specialize, and so I was just making a buck, and yeah, no. All right. So, 125 labor hours in Japan, but only 100 in the U.S. But wait a minute, so then who has an absolute advantage in computers?
US.
But how can we have an absolute advantage in both things?
Because
We're the United States of America.
Because we're the United States of America. All right. It is possible for you to be the best at everything. I know, because you're an American. So, if in order to have an advantage in trade, you're supposed to specialize in what you have an absolute advantage in, if we have an absolute advantage in both, how do we specialize in both? We did. Remember, we did half and half. We did half wheat, half computers, right? And we're still going to come out on top. Okay? So, if the U.S. has an absolute advantage in both goods, then why on earth is Japan specializing in computers?
Cheaper to make money.
quality.
because it costs them fewer resources per unit of production to make a computer than it does wheat. And they got to specialize in something so they can gain some small advantage in specializing in what they're better at making than the other thing. Follow? I am a high school female athlete in the fall. And boy, I can bump set and spike like crazy, but I can also pitch and hit like no other. How do I decide which sport to play? Which one you make varsity in?
But
Right.
you said you're good at both.
I am good at both.
So just
Maybe you're better at the other. That's a what if.
Season.
That is a what if.
It's America, though. We're good at both.
All right. So, you have to measure the cost of producing the good. And in this instance, we're measuring the cost of producing the good in terms of its input, which is labor. So you specialize in what you have the lowest cost in. If you don't have absolute advantage, you take a look at what your cost is and you specialize in what your lowest cost is. Or in other words, whatever you have the lowest opportunity cost to produce. Oh, it all came back to itself. How could chapter 1 be coming up in chapter 3? This isn't fair. This is econ. All right, so the opportunity cost of a computer is how much wheat you give up. The opportunity cost of wheat is how many computers you give up. And so while Japan does not have an absolute advantage in either one, they have a comparative advantage in computers. And comparative advantage is when you can make something at a lower cost than someone else. Or lower opportunity cost than someone else. So who has the comparative advantage in computers? To answer that, you have to come up with what the opportunity cost is for each country. So in the US, you're going to give up 10 tons of wheat for every computer. In Japan, you're going to give up 5 tons of wheat for every computer. So Japan has the comparative advantage in computers. Okay? You don't have to have an absolute advantage in order to have a comparative advantage. Can you have both? For sure. For instance, the United States has both an absolute and a comparative advantage in wheat in this example. Okay? All right, so when there are differences in opportunity cost, that's where we get comparative advantage and that's where we get beneficial trade. If you specialize in what you have a comparative advantage in, then you're going to be better off in trading that good. Now, we've done this with 2 goods and 2 countries. The world we know is far more complex than that, right? But each trade decision is made one good at a time. And so producers and consumers are still looking at these things. They throw this farmer and rancher thing in here. They're talking about, are you growing corn or are you growing cattle? Right? It's going to take the same acreages of land to do both. You can't necessarily do both well. Okay, more practice for you! Who has an absolute advantage in coffee?
Brazil.
And who has an absolute advantage in wine?
Argentina.
Who has a comparative advantage in wine?
Yes, Argentina.
Let's figure it out. Right? So you were right there. For Argentina to make more wine, they got to give up 2 pounds of coffee. For Brazil to make more wine, how much coffee are they giving up? 5 pounds. Good. Okay. So, yeah, we totally made assumptions. The world is far, far, far more complex than this, and we're going to get into that. But what I've done to you right here, right now, is hopefully proven to you that trade does, in fact, make everybody better off.
Wait, was that the... No. You serious?
You didn't think I could do it, did you?
I did it. I was like, wow.
You were hoping I'd have to push the quiz back, but no.
Nah, I mean...
You wouldn't have done it anyways.
No, I wouldn't have. Can't. Can't.
Well, you could.
Actually, no. They won't push the AP test back for me, so I can't,
But they keep testing.
Oh my god, was it actually not recording? You guys watched it say it was starting to record. Oh, okay.